Hi, third-year English students. My name is Zohra, and I'm your teacher of pedagogical trends this year. And our lesson today is about pedagogy and schooling. This recorded presentation is based on these references. We're going to use extracts from Leach and Moon 1999 and Peter Gray 2012. The main objectives of this virtual lecture are as follows. 1. It provides a central understanding of the way compulsory education has developed through time and the reasons behind its emergence. It also raises students' awareness of its impact on their everyday life and behavior. 2. It aims to supply students with the basic language key concepts to get acquainted with schooling terminology in particular and pedagogical trends in terminology in general. 3. It offers opportunities for students to make use of their higher order thinking skills to evaluate compulsory education and think of how to promote it, particularly in Algeria. What is pedagogy, students? According to Leach and Moon, 1999, it is the practice that a teacher, together with a group or a particular group of learners, creates, enacts, and experiences. Another question which could be raised: is pedagogy an art or a science? For researchers who see pedagogy as an art, they say that right from the beginning, education was assigned the status of an art, the art of teaching, of leading children to knowledge. This concept reminds us that the profession of educator first emerged in ancient Greece. Back then, the role of educator was performed by slaves who were given the noble task of walking their master's children to school, taking care of their physical appearance, and accompanying them during the chores and play. The founding father of education is widely considered to be Socrates, the 5th century BC. For those researchers who support the fact that pedagogy is a science, at the end of the 19th century, the development of such scientific fields as sociology and psychology is accompanied by the emergence of pedagogy as an applied science. That is, it starts to be viewed as a true science. Pedagogy is now treated as a science with the understanding that its ultimate objective, as in the other cases, is not so much to describe or explain, but instead to guide the process of teaching and learning. That is, it is a field of science that just might to teach us and how to teach. Now, let's have an idea about the historical background of schooling in general. Well, children started to learn through hunting and gathering. They were hunters-gatherers. In the beginning, for hundreds of thousands of years, children educated themselves through self-directed play and exploration. Children in hunter-gatherer cultures learned what they needed to know to become effective adults through their own play and exploration. The strong drives in children to play and explore presumably came about during our evolution as hunter-gatherers to serve the needs of education. Adults in hunter-gatherer cultures allowed children almost unlimited freedom to play and explore on their own because they were recognized that those activities are children's natural ways of learning. To be effective hunters and gatherers, people had to acquire a vast knowledge of the plants and animals on which they depended and of the landscapes within which they foraged. They also had to develop great skill in crafting and using tools of hunting and gathering. They had to be able to take initiatives and be creative in finding foods. However, they did not have to work long hours, and the work they did was exciting. The hunter-gatherer groups did not distinguish between work and play. Essentially, all of life was understood as play. With the rise of agriculture and later of industry, children became forced laborers, and play and exploration were eliminated. Concerning the agricultural era, in this period, agriculture gradually changed all that. With agriculture, people could produce more food, which allowed them to have more children. Agriculture also allowed people or forced people to live in permanent dwellings, where the crops were planted rather than live a nomadic life. And this is in turn allowed people to accumulate property. But these changes occurred at a great cost in labor. While hunter-gatherers skillfully harvested what nature had grown, farmers had to plow, plant, cultivate, tend their flocks, and so on. Successful farming required long hours of relatively unskilled, repetitive labor, much of which could be done by children. With larger families, children had to work in the fields to help feed the young siblings, or they had to work at home to help care for those siblings. Children's lives changed gradually from the free pursuit of their own interests to increasingly more time spent at work that was required to serve the rest of the family. Agriculture and the associated ownership of land and accumulation of property also created clear status differences. People who did not own land became dependent on those who did. Also, landowners discovered that they could increase their own wealth by getting other people to work for them. Systems of slavery and other forms of servitude developed. Those with wealth could become even wealthier with the help of others who depended on them for survival. All this culminated with feudalism in the Middle Ages, when society became steeply hierarchical, with a few kings and lords at the top and masses of slaves and serfs at the bottom. Now, the lot of most people, children included, was servitude. The principal lessons that children had to learn were obedience, expression of their own will, and the show of reverence toward lords and masters. A rebellious spirit could well result in death. In the Middle Ages, lords and masters had no qualms about physically beating children into submission. On the other hand, and with the rise of industry and of a new bourgeoisie class, feudalism gradually subsided, but this did not immediately improve the lives of most children. Business owners, like landowners, needed laborers and could profit by extracting as much work from them as possible, with as little compensation as possible. Everyone knows of the exploitation that followed and still exists in many parts of the world. People, including children or young children, worked most of their waking hours 7 days a week in beastly conditions just to survive. The labor of children was moved from fields where there had at least been sunshine, fresh air, and some opportunities to play, into dark, crowded, dirty factories. In many thousands of them died each year of diseases, starvation, and exhaustion. Not until the 19th century did England pass laws limiting children labor. In 1883, for example, new legislation forbade textile manufacturers from employing children under the age of 9 and limited the weekly work hours. In the philosophy of agriculture and industry education in sum, a good child was an obedient child who suppressed his or her urge to play and explore and dutifully carried out the orders of adult masters. Such education, fortunately, was never fully successful. The human instincts to play and explore are so powerful that they can never be fully beaten out of a child. Let us take an example about the children in the Industrial Revolution. Children as young as 5 were sent to work in factories during the Industrial Revolution. It is important for poor families to send as many members of their family out to work as possible, so they could earn as much money as they could. There was no help for poor families except from charities. If a family couldn't work, they could become homeless and hungry. Children also worked as chimney sweeps, in coal mines, as servants, and in cotton mills. Many were injured by machines or hurt in industrial accidents. Some of the laws that were launched to protect children at that time are: before 1800, school was not free and most poor children only received education in a Sunday school. In 1833, the government passed the Factory Act, making 2 hours of education a day compulsory for children working in factories. The government also granted money to charities to help schools for the first time. In 1844, the Frac Schools Union was set up to give schooling to very poor children. In 1870, Foster's Act set up state-funded board schools for primary education. In 1880, the Education Act made school attendance compulsory for children between the ages of 5 and 10. In 1902, the 1902 Education Act established a system of secondary schools. As industry progressed and became somewhat more automated, the need for children labor declined in some parts of the world. The idea began to spread that childhood should be a time for learning, and schools for children were developed as places of learning. The idea and practice of universal compulsory public education developed gradually in Europe from the early 16th century on into the 19th. For various reasons, some religious and some secular, the idea of universal compulsory education arose and gradually spread. Education was understood as inculcation. By the end of the 17th century, Germany, which was the leader in the development of schooling, had laws in most of its states requiring that children attend school, but the Lutheran Church, not the state, ran the schools. In America, in the mid-17th century, Massachusetts became the first colony to mandate schooling, the clearly stated purpose of which was to turn children into good Puritans. Everyone involved in the founding and support of schools had a clear view about what lessons children should learn in school. Quite correctly, nobody believed that children left to their own devices, even in a rich setting for learning, would all learn just exactly the lessons that they, the adults, deemed to be so important. All of them saw schooling as inculcation, the implanting of certain truths and ways of thinking into children's minds. The only known method of inculcation, then as well as now, is forced repetition and testing for memory of what was repeated. Repetition and memorization of lessons is tedious work for children whose instincts urge them constantly to play freely and explore the world of their own. Just as children did not adapt readily to laboring in fields and factories, they did not adapt readily to schooling. Everyone assumed that to make children learn in school, the children's willfulness would have to be beaten out of them. Punishments of all sorts were understood as intrinsic to the educational process. In some schools, children were permitted certain periods of play to allow them to let off steam, but play was not considered to be a vehicle of learning. In the classroom, play was the enemy of learning. The brute force methods long used to keep children on task on the farm or in the factory were transported into schools to make children learn. In recent times, the methods of schooling have become less harsh, but basic assumptions have not changed. Learning continues to be defined as children's work, and power-assertive means are used to make children do that work. In the 19th and 20th centuries, public schooling gradually evolved toward what we all recognize today as conventional schooling. The methods of discipline became more human, or at least less corporal. The curriculum expanded as knowledge expanded to include an ever-growing list of subjects, and the number of hours, days, and years of compulsory schooling increased continuously. School gradually replaced field work, factory work, and domestic chores as the child's primary or the first job. Just as adults put in their 8-hour day at their place of employment, children today put in their 6-hour day at school, plus another hour or more of homework and often more hours of lessons outside of school. In the 19th and 20th centuries, public schooling gradually evolved toward what we all recognize today as conventional schooling. The methods of discipline became more human, or at least less corporal. The curriculum expanded as knowledge expanded to include an ever-growing list of subjects, and the number of hours, days, and years of compulsory schooling increased continuously. School gradually replaced field work, factory work, and domestic chores as the child's primary or the first job. Just as adults put in their 8-hour day at their place of employment, children today put in their 6-hour day at school, plus another hour or more of homework and often more hours of lessons outside of school. Over time, children's lives have become increasingly defined and structured by the school curriculum. Children now are almost universally identified by their grade in school, much as adults are identified by their job or career. Clever educators today might use play as a tool to get children to enjoy some of their lessons, and children might be allowed some free playtime. Now, I would stop here, students. Thank you very much for your attention, and see you very soon.